is called Peeling the Onion on Manufacturing Efficiency. And just before we get started, to give you a little background, um, this presentation, the catalyst for it was over the last couple of years talking with organizations and different conferences and different things like that. And everyone, the one common theme that goes across every organization, industry, sector that we work with is the shortage of labor. There's a lot of different theories on that and what have you, but a lot of it just stems out of after the recession, everyone leaned way out, and the economy has been going very strong, and there's just not everyone's working. And if you do, you don't necessarily want to take on more staff because some of the businesses out there are pretty cyclical, and you don't want to have to bring somebody on and lay them off again and all that noise. And so it's how can we do more with less? And so that's kind of the background of it. It's just a program we kind of actually put together to try to go out and help organizations with this type of stuff. So the this is what the agendas are. Introductions again. My name's Steve Thompson. I've been with Applied for 19 years, I think, something like that. I help on the engineering or on the professional services side, both on the software development and the design and manufacturing engineering. And then we're going to go through some definitions. I like to clarify those up front because there's, personally, I get kind of confused a little bit on them. And so I like to clear them up so I know what I'm talking about anyway. Then we'll go through the process. Then the biggest part, the areas of consideration, and then we'll review what we talked about. Again, this program came about from seeing the need out in the industry, or this presentation and program, I guess. So what we did over the last year or so is we talked to a number of our senior manufacturing engineers, design engineers, people that have had a lot of experience out in manufacturing to pick their brains. What do they see? What's important? We have the privilege of being able to work with a lot of different organizations, and so we've seen a lot of the inner workings of a lot of organizations. And so every organization is different, has different priorities, has different businesses, has different history. So they're all a little bit different. Obviously, they're all working to some extent because everybody's in business still, but there's different nuances you can take from each one of those and kind of put together a priority list and do some rough categorization of different topics and things to think about to help you sensitize to the fact of, hey, maybe take a look at this or take a look at that. This is not going to be a deep dive into how to, what the torque settings are for the most efficient use of air on a air ratchet on, whatever production line. This is more at a higher level. It's more to get people thinking. Maybe just give the manufacturing efficiency is such a broad topic. There's so many aspects to it, but this is hopefully try to make it into a bigger clump, and then how to kind of dissect that a little bit and take off bite-sized pieces that people can handle. So that's where we're going to go. So first, definitions. Efficiency and productivity. Productivity is very, very common. How productive is the workforce? How much stuff is getting out the door? It's a lot of the times it's associated with quantity. Efficiency is similar in that but it has to do more with focusing on what the inputs are and maybe the quality or the elimination of waste. A good example of that would be if you're going to build 100 units, and you can do that and have your ratios are very good as far as to efficiency. Say you're at 90% efficient, and you get 100 units out. Well, if you need to go to 110, your productivity would increase because you'd be getting 110 out of the work, out of a week's work or whatever. But your efficiency might go down to 85% because the efficiency assumes all your labor costs and stuff too. So if you have to work 50 hours, so you got 10 hours of time and a half. That's not as efficient use of dollars, but it is more productive because you're getting more work done. So there's a little bit of a difference there, if that makes sense. Overtime's time and a half. That's not as efficient as straight wages. So that's kind of what I look at, or that type of differentiation. They're both very, very important, but there's just a little bit of difference between the two. So the process, what we like to do, and just kind of a general process. This isn't something earth-shattering. This is done, I don't know in how many different industries, just a simplified process. But it's very, very important, because if you're going to set off to do some efficiency, try to work on some efficiency in manufacturing, you have to, as Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. So how are you going to end this? How are you going to determine if it was successful or not? Well, the first step in that is to establish a background. So a baseline of, where you're at today. Maybe it's your key performance indicators or KPI. Maybe you already have those established. Maybe you don't. I've been in organizations, successful organizations, that some do, some don't. But you have to have some type of measurement. And then the next step in the process is to take that information that you've gathered there and formulate it into some type of a plan, using some analysis to understand where the bottlenecks are. Maybe, that'll get the plan. Will get into ideas for the plan, the areas of consideration that we'll talk about here in a little bit. Get into that. Then the straight implementation of the plan. Okay, you have a plan. This is what we want to do. Implement it. And then again, go for the review. Go back to the baseline. Measure everything again. How was it improved? How was it not improved? Did it change anything? And then what was it? And then you can quantify that. The key is to quantify it so you can see measurable results. Oops, sorry about that. So just a little bit more talking about the process. Usually within the background stage, you establish a baseline. Some of the information could be throughput, like I said, KPIs. And a lot of times it's getting down on the floor, and you have to measure things, whether it's time studies, how many people are working. There's a countless number of different ways to look at it. But also get into, flow mapping, spaghetti diagramming, whatever, to try to understand how material flows through the plant. Different things like that. You just kind of have to document the way it is right now. And then would continue on the other parts. We're talking about the plan. Some things to think about, just at a high level, is you don't necessarily, a lot of people use 5S or lean or ISO or all sorts of different focuses. We had applied, and a lot of other organizations, there's some common themes throughout manufacturing engineering. And that's just minimizing non-value add. That's kind of a lean deal, but that's something to think about. Movement, there's no value added for the consumer by moving stuff around the plant. That doesn't matter to them. So looking at maybe factory layout, maybe there's some monuments that can't move. Maybe there's a lot of things that can. Software integration, that's a big one too. How is the data moving around? Is there redundancies? Is there people having to manually input data? A spreadsheet again and again, or just even once. That just creates errors. And then there's some, manufacturing engineering software that you can actually do some simulations with, things like that. And then, of course, implement the plan. And then, do it again. And so it's an ongoing evaluation. It's a continuous loop. Every time you peel the onion, you get another layer there. But it's important. And so anyway, that's the process that I like to look at, to try to carve out a process that's not so overwhelming. Maybe you can do smaller bits and pieces, but if you follow a process to measure, plan, implement, and remeasure, then you can quantify what you're doing and then capture that success and share that success so organization, other people in the organization can see that and you can gain some traction. So now talking about on the planning during the plan portion of the process, there's some areas to look at. Workflow is obviously one that's very common. We have projects going with organizations just to try to map out, more efficiently ways to use warehouse space. If some of your, some of the racks may be full that are close to the line with products that maybe are obsolete, or maybe they're not obsolete, but just maybe not used as much. And so you start measuring how far and how many fork trucks you have running around. That's a big deal. That requires labor, that requires time. It's a process of analysis that you can really gain some traction on. Some other areas, that's just a big one in general. It's one of the signs and symptoms that I heard from some of our key engineers is how many fork trucks are running around, forklifts are running around. That's a indicator of, just the logistics of the whole situation, that maybe there needs to be some kitting or different things like that to help out. We talked about the key performance indicators. If you take a little bit of a dive just into those pieces, it's interesting because, it's not always known to everyone in the organization, even on the, especially the folks on the manufacturing floor, what are the key performance indicators? If you see that number, is there something you can do about it? Is it just a random number? Are we shoot for 20, or is it a number of units, or is it the number of hours? Like I said, we've been fortunate to be able to go into many, many organizations, manufacturing floors. Some really have it dialed in well. Some you could ask anybody on the floor and they'd say, well, what are the KPIs, and they can recite them off. So there's some work there, and the key is to make sure that they align with what you want to do. If your 10-year plan is, for instance, if your 10-year plan is to, take and be, less waste, for instance, say you're an injection molding shop or what have you, and you want to have rework and regrind down to a certain value. The plan is by 2025 we're going to have only 3% of our product in rework or regrind. So in order to achieve that goal, you need to measure it. And if you make that measurement, one of your key KPI, it'd be pretty easy to see how you're aligning with your long-term strategy, and it'll keep it at the forefront. So that's something to keep in mind too. That's one I didn't think of before talking to that, is aligning everything together. And then what's not being captured. As everyone knows, you can't manage anything unless you measure it. And so the capturing the data that that tells the story of your organization is very important. So knowledge sharing. This is another area where you can improve manufacturing efficiency. A couple of examples here. Transfer of information from engineering to production. That's a big one. There's a lot of organizations now that are leveraging that. If you're creating a bill of materials naturally as you create parts and assemblies, or as you create assemblies and sub-assemblies and what have you. And so if there's some forethought put into that, and it's designed with manufacturing in mind, you can create a BOM that is going to line up with how it's going to be built out on the floor. If it's lined up, if it's done in that regard, when you pass along that information into your MRP or ERP system, you can push your engineering BOM and use that for your manufacturing BOM. saving a lot of duplicate information, getting passed along correctly. It's done in the right subsets. The engineer can control how that's going to be built. Obviously, that's not done in a vacuum chamber. That's done with manufacturing involved from the design. And taking to the end, the work instructions can consume the BOM as it's intended to. And so what you know, it's a very clean process from engineering, design engineering, manufacturing engineering, work instructions. You can have some great clarity on your work instructions when you know, and your BOM audits are done daily if that's how you're doing it. So you can really get some great leverage out of your engineering data, along with some clarity, really nice clarity into the production and work instructions for the people out on the floor. So that's an idea for gaining efficiency. ERP, MRP, that's a big one. This is one of the top 2 or 3 that our team has stated that is the biggest opportunity for gains, if you will, just because of whether it's running out of parts, whether it's the, putting parts together, clarity for how things are. You can start to really analyze how it's done if your process is fully developed and fully defined and clear within your ERP system. If you attach labor hours to every step of the process, all of a sudden you have your benchmark and you know it's accurate. You can start to do predictive variability on, your busy times or slow times. You can actually start to quantify, we can help sales in this area by lowering, we know we can, we're not as busy during this time, the off time of year. We could probably, we want to keep our team, all of our people in production busy all year. We're not working overtime, so maybe our labor costs a little bit less, so we can pass a little bit less on to our customers, or a little bit of savings onto our customers. Therefore, maybe push a little bit of sales, maybe help direct sales to the off season rather than the peak season, do some predictive work there. Maybe you see, you start to see when you're fully defined, where everything is in the process, get a little bit more clarity there, so you can look at, these are some areas we got a lot of labor in this particular cell. Why is it so much? So then you can really hone in on that and start to dial it in a little bit better. Well, maybe it's there's people are doing it different. It's creating rework. Well, maybe it's a work instruction thing. All sorts of different things out there to work on. And we've worked with organizations that have this to the nines dialed in, and it is so impressive. It's unbelievable that they can. They know how many hours it's going to take them within 3 minutes of a salesperson putting in a product. They'll know within 2 or 3 minutes with this automated system that this is what's going to take. These are all the steps. These are all the processes. This is all the code for the machines. This is everything, and it's going to take this many hours to do it. And it's accurate. And then there's other organizations. They know they have, they know what they need to get done every week. They know how much they need to get out. They know how much labor is for the plant. And some of it, some organizations just use the MRP ERP system for, purchasing and accounting. We need to get this many parts because we got this many orders. And so they go in and plug it in and do it that way. Hey, if it's working, it's working. But you can gain a lot of efficiency by tuning that in. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with, full-grown or full-blown systems that come from a manufacturer or a ERP manufacturer that is 100%. This is the way you have to do it. You can do customized things, maybe to get the information you want. there's options there, but the key is MRP, ERP. There's a lot of room to gain some efficiency there, and it pays for itself for sure. Oops, hit the wrong button. I do that from time to time. So the next slide, work cell design. So this was another area that's big. We work with many organizations on this. There's just when you have a work cell, and there's a certain amount of different things that obviously get assembled within that, and that's looking at the work cell as a whole. Maybe it's putting, some people, the story I've heard is, yeah, we have 2 people on this work cell, and the reason we have 2 is because typically one's just going to get parts, and then the other one's working on the project. And it's like, you can totally see that. Yeah, we don't have enough of part number, blah, blah, blah. Can you go run out and get it out in the warehouse? Yep, I'm on it. Anything else we need? Nope, I'll go get it, Where if you can, that doesn't add any value to the end product. So if you could do maybe some kits, some carts where everything's all in the right spot, that could be delivered and all the pieces are on there. That's obviously very common, very, very, just makes total sense. So you get away from that parts runner. Also the technology and some of the production equipment. When we talk about KPI, you can start to look at how can I get real-time information on my KPI by the work cell. I don't know if you guys have done a lot of exploring on the new technology out there, like Raspberry Pis and stuff that run very, very low cost, simple baby computers, if you will, that just can transmit information. And with the amount of sensors that have the sensor technologies that's just been blowing up because of all the autonomous cars and all these other things, that the sensor technologies is just great right now. And so with these Raspberry Pis, you can set up your key, maybe your key performance indicator. Maybe there's a large break, that bends some huge sheet metal or whatever out on the floor. Maybe it's been there since 1950. It works great, but it doesn't have any of the famous brown cord running to it that you can transmit information back and forth to it. And maybe that's not important, but what is important is every time that cycles, and the frequency of when it cycles is very important information to you, because that's a key part in the assembly. Well, with the new sensors, well, maybe it's a proximity sensor or something that's tapped on there. So every time a part, the machine senses movement, it cycles at once. And then you can use those Raspberry Pis, send that back to a Wi-Fi, via Wi-Fi into kind of a database, and have real-time dashboard on, yeah, this is cycling every day. It's cycling 30 times a day, but for some reason, it cycles once every 8 minutes until 11 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, for whatever reason, it cycles once every 14 minutes. And then about 3 o'clock, it really doesn't cycle anymore. And so you can start to take that apart and say, well, why is that? Why isn't this cycling at a steady rate? It should be. That's how I envisioned it. And then you can go down there and say, oh, well, actually, and talk to them and say, well, why isn't this cycling at a steady rate? And they, oh, well, because we ran out of parts here, or we were waiting on a forklift here. And so then you can start to do some root cause analysis and start to dig into this, and it's until you start to see the results you want to get. So when you talk about work cell design, there's some critical areas within a work cell. There is technology available today that makes creating a dashboard, if you will, very feasible. It's not a $200,000 project that just is that's just not doable any cost-wise. That's not the case anymore. It's actually fairly inexpensive. So kind of cool, and you can start to give you the data you need to dissect some of that stuff. The number one area that kept coming up from our team was people processes. My dad worked at Honeywell down in the Twin Cities on the floor for 30 some years or whatever, and he was a group leader, and he used to hate engineering. Well, not hate. Hate's a strong word. He didn't understand the value of it, because back in the 60s and 70s, 80s, engineering, the state of engineering was you just throw it over the wall. Here's what the guys need to do it on the floor. And my dad was always frustrated by that, because he knew how to do it on the floor because he was doing it every day. But there wasn't any communication between the floor and engineering, or the floor and manufacturing engineering, and they're just being told what to do. Well, anybody that's been involved in the told what to do process knows that that's not the best way to make it happen. So when you're talking about how to gain efficiency on the floor, start with the people that are doing it. And I know a lot of you guys out there are, and that's fantastic, and you already recognize the value there. But work with them to figure out, and sometimes it's a cultural issue. And what I mean by that, not culture as far as people's backgrounds, but the culture of the organization, the culture of, you don't want to speak up because you might get your hand slapped or different things like that. It has to be nurturing, or not nurturing is probably the wrong word, but it has to be a positive environment where people are comfortable speaking up and giving suggestions, and those suggestions are carefully thought out and reviewed and made whole if that's the case, and giving people the power to make their own decisions. People aren't robots. If you treat them like it, it's not gonna work out so good. But if you can start to change that culture over time of, how can we do this better together? The teamwork, the team aspect, that can have tremendous results on manufacturing efficiency. There we go. So here is one. They've talked about huddle boards a lot. I did some research on those, and they've crossed multiple industries. Different places have different uses. But I saw a really, really cool use of the huddle board recently. And what it was is everyone, it was a whiteboard, if you will, normal sized whiteboard, and everybody for the production that's where they'd meet up before the beginning of the shift. And they talk about, here's where we need to get done. Here's our responsibilities for the week or the day. Well, they did it daily, so here's what we need to get done for the day. And then everybody's tags, or the different processes that are in the plant, here's who's working on the different things, and it was Velcroed with, badges or whatever. So everybody knew where everybody was. So if you needed to, get a hold of somebody, that's also a good safety feature if you're into that. But then it was, okay, does anybody have any ideas to how we can do this better? And this is where it got really cool, because if there's ideas, you could write them down on there and they go through them. And rather than just saying, well, we need to get another winch for the third line or whatever, and just shooting out blind ideas and thoughts, the person that came up with the idea was given the authority or the autonomy to kind of research that a little bit, dig into it, figure out what would be needed. Maybe it's a piece of equipment, maybe it's a different way of, maybe it's a fixture, whatever. And it wasn't to the very high technical level, but just to make sure it was thought through. So the idea was captured. Then they decided on, okay, we're going to need to move this to the next stage in, say, 1 week. Okay, so they put the due date on there. We need to have a response within a week. And then after that, it went to who's responsible for it now. So you have a production worker, comes up with an idea, they get like a week to work on it. Then it goes, and then at that point, it would be transferred. Say it goes to engineering or maintenance or different things like that. It would go to that and the implementation of it. So it was very cool because people had a voice, and it would be, they could be seen as, hey, yeah, I put in two good ideas or whatever, but it just felt like everybody was a part of the team, and it really uh, it really resonated with the uh, company or the organization and the people there. And I was talking to some of the leadership there, and they mentioned this been about 10 years in the making to get that to where it was. And there's a lot of different things they're doing in regard to that, but it's all based on working as a team, um, creating that environment that everyone's voice should be heard, and then how to improve it, and kind of go from there. So that was just an example uh, that I thought was very worthwhile sharing with everybody on, what is, what's a quick example of that. So a little bit of the review. Um, the process itself, it's you just want to make sure that there is one. This is an example of one, very, very simple, but it's also very effective. So you come up with a background, you know, establish what you're measuring, begin with the end in mind. How are we going to measure this again to find out if it's changed anything? Then you make a plan, you go through the different areas of consideration, um, you implement the plan, and then again, when you've got it dialed in, you review it, see what how it worked. Um, and like we talked about, the areas of consideration are I don't I there's so many of them it's ridiculous. But some of the ones we talked about, um, workflow, that's a pretty straightforward one. Work instructions. We were recently working with an organization, and we talked, and they said, "Well, how do you know, what's your work instructions look like?" Well, they said we don't have any, or the no, it wasn't. We didn't have any. It's like they're not being followed, or they're out of date, or what have you. And I said, "Well, how do you know the same thing is going out the door every day?" And they didn't have really an answer, and it's tough because if you don't set what the expectations are, how does anybody know if they're actually doing it or not? Or maybe the expectations just get it out the door, but if there's quality issues, how are you going to know what the stem of that was? Was it, was there steps within the work instructions that were missed? Are there work instructions? How can you manage a process if the steps aren't even documented accurately, and there's not really any time to do any analysis on that if it's not even being measured? So it's really tricky. It seems kind of straightforward, but it is very, very important. Um, Another big one that MRP had to do with, we talked a little bit about this, a sign or symptom is inventory accuracy. Are there, daily or emergency meetings that say, hey, we're running out of this, we got to order more of this, and this is shut down the line, we're waiting on that. Is that a known going into the day? Is there some alarm that was set off prior to um, production going, hey, we're out of this part? If that's the case, if that's not the case, if production's telling you when you're running out of parts, um, that may be a really good sign that you might want to really consider um, evaluating some MRP use and strategy to maybe capture uh, where the parts are being consumed, how they're being tracked, a lot of different areas there, because that's a stressful situation. I mean, and it's completely preventable. Takes a lot of work, but it's definitely preventable. Workflow, I mean, it's forklift traffic. That's a big, big thing. Product movement. Um, how can we minimize that? Uh, and then, of course, the biggest one is the people processes. What do the folks on the floor say? What are some of the things that they think or they know? They're doing it every day. What's some of the tricky spots? Take an objective look at how th're doing it and say, why are you using two knives to cut that, or why are you doing it that way? Oh, because this or because that. Well, then that's pretty straight. I mean, those are just low-hanging fruit that you can trim up really quick and get some traction. And then, spread the word on, evangelize a little bit on it so you can get some more resources to do some more things like that. So those are just all straightforward, but all things to consider when you're looking at manufacturing efficiency. And again, it's continuous improvement. I know here at Applied, we go through our processes regularly. And fortunately, over time, you really do start to see some nice growth, some nice change. It doesn't just apply to manufacturing, it applies to the whole organization. How can we do things better? It's a culture, it's a mindset that really can pay off some nice benefits. So I kind of went through that a little bit quick. There's a lot of information there, but if there's any questions, you could shoot them out via the question thing on the tab or whatever they call that thing on the side. You can put a question on there. If not, my contact information, you can just call Applied and ask for me. I'd be more than happy to talk about anything to do with manufacturing efficiency. I'm available. You can go on the website, sthompson@go-applied.com, or give me a phone call. Call them in any of the offices. They all get routed to the same place, and they can get a hold of me too. So if there isn't any questions, I appreciate your time today. I know everyone's time is precious, so I appreciate it, and thank you.